In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create motion blur within an image. The first thing that you want to do is duplicate the layer. You can press the Command J key or go to the Layers menu and select Duplicate Layer. Name this layer Motion Blur. Select OK. Second thing that we want to do is change this layer to a smart object. So on the name Motion Blur, you can right click and then select Convert to Smart Object. The Smart Object option allows you to make multiple adjustments using a filter. If you're not using a Smart Object, you can only make one change within the filters gallery. So we're able to do multiple adjustments. So we go to the filters gallery to blur and then select Motion Blur. We are in a dialog box that allows us, if we are in the preview mode, to see the actual blur that takes place, the direction of the blur, as well as that distance. So let's put somewhat of a large distance of our motion blur that's taking place. Let's do this sideways and then select OK. You'll see that you now have the opportunity to work with changing your motion blur by double-clicking on the motion blur to increase or decrease that effect if you're not satisfied with that. And you are left with a mask that you can then change by painting in or painting away the areas of motion blur. For this particular example, I'm going to click on the layer mask. I'm going to press the Command I key for black to fill the entire space, so we're hiding the effect of the motion blur that takes place. By using the brush tool, I will then use the white paintbrush by selecting the white palette here. My opacity here, I'm going to increase that to 100% and then just simply start to paint in the effect of the motion blur. So I can then use the right bracket key to increase the size of the blur that's taking place and fill this space here. So it looks like the right hand side as well as part of the pole on the left hand side has this form of motion that's taking place. I can then make further adjustments to this filter by painting black in its place. So if I went too far, I can then go back in and clean up some of these areas here also. As mentioned before, you can click on the motion blur word and then you can make the distance of the motion blur change or the direction of that motion blur as well. If you are not necessarily excited about the intensity of that motion blur, you can then go to the opacity range and reduce the amount of that motion blur. Clicking on the visibility of that layer, this is the before image and the after image. You can then see that the focus is now directed onto the Buddha and away from the unconsequential areas.